Welcome to the Crypto Blue Hour. Today we're going to be chatting about our origin stories in crypto, kind of what led us going into creating this podcast. But first, Charlie, how was your week?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been great. I mean, at work, there's a lot going on at work, which is exciting. We don't have to talk about that much at all, but no, it's been busy. It's cold here in New York. Been trying to get on the bicycle as much as possible, but it's definitely getting cold. It's supposed to be -10 I think it's supposed to be -10 tomorrow night. So We'll see. What about you? What's going on? It's cold in Austin, right?
Yeah, cold. We've got a nice storm. Actually, I think over a third of Austin is out of power right now, but luckily the podcast gods have blessed us. And we got Wi-Fi, we got power, we got semi-heat.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, doing well. Also coming up on my 1-year anniversary of working in the space, which is dope.
What day is that?
I think it's the 4th or the 8th. It's coming up in the next week.
Nice, man. Gosh, that's awesome. Mine's in May.
Love it. Yeah, the time flies. It's been a crazy year.
I'm going to write that down. I'm going to send you something. I'm going to send you something cool. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but
yeah, looking forward to it. But yeah, let's kick it off, man. Getting into why the fuck do we care about crypto? Like, what's our superhero origin story?
Yeah, I'll get us started because I've got like a longer beginning. Before let's take it a one step before crypto. I think for me, I think for both of us being young 30s, born in like the early early 90s, when we were like 10 or so. The stat that I recently found was that 50% of households in the U.S. had desktop computers in their houses connected to the internet, connected to like dial-up internet. So you would, if anybody was on the phone, you could get cut off that kind of internet. Classics, fax machine style sort of existence in the houses. But Snood and Minesweeper were sort of fun things that we would play with on the computer. But ultimately, it was like games and then sort of typing. And then in elementary school, we had a computer lab, and we'd do some there was a game, like a westward expansion game that we played as kids. That was like the Oregon Trail or something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we played that game as kids in like 5th grade or something like that. And then in middle school, we had computer labs where we learned actually how to query Google. You're learning to query and actually understanding a little bit better how to use the internet and how to use the network that is the internet. And all of that sort of just was indoctrinated as kids in us. And sort of it's really interesting and unique in comparison to somebody like my mother, born in the 60s, early 60s. And when she and I talk about the internet, she's incredibly tech savvy, but she didn't grow up with that. And so I like to say internet native. That's certainly not a new term, but it really does, I think, draw a juxtaposition just because that network effect is so inherent to my understanding of the world, despite the fact that it's maybe at the time was just exclusive to the internet. That network effect for me growing up and then later in life, like I still think of, I think of borders as amorphous kind of, which is something that maybe if I was born in the 60s might be a very weird thing to say. But, it's more like a network of people in the world versus like a bunch of countries who are isolated as far as I'm concerned. And I think that's as a result of just being internet native.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. For me, like I grew up in South Carolina on a 60-acre farm where we were lucky enough to have dial-up internet and like AOL. Yeah. And in middle school, like we were doing typing classes in elementary school on typewriters so that we could, because they didn't have computers. Oh, cool. And then we would get to computer classes. But one of the interesting things that I remember is it kind of related to what you're saying. In middle school, we all had AOL Instant Messenger, which was like
a classic.
Yeah. And you could join AOL chat rooms. So I was like talking with probably some sexual predators, but people in different states using AOL, and like you would just join a chat room and you could talk to anybody. And we grew up. I mean, I was 12, 13 years old doing this, which is a crazy experience when you think about it. Didn't exist before then, so that people weren't communicating in that way, and it was just kind of a natural progression for us.
Definitely. I mean, I was communicating that way with my friends who were across the street, across town from me. Like we'd be texting about, we'd be aiming way before we had cell phones, right? I got a cell phone in 2009, like 2010 or 2009 when we went to college. But this was also the era of LimeWire and Napster and all sorts of weird websites like eBaum's World and forums, like spending so many hours every night, like not even sleeping so many nights because I'd be just like in front of the computer in the dark room, this huge cubic computer with a separate desktop, like the hard drive was separate from the computer itself. the monitor, and I'd be on there just reading about like really obscure music, mostly hip hop. And it was very like not okay to listen to hip hop in my household. But I was so interested to buy it, and I just couldn't get enough. And then I'd be like, then I'd sneak away to the basement and I'd listen to it out loud. Like, I'm trying to remember how that was possible. Maybe that was later in high school. We had iPods, but yeah, so absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, they had those little MP3 players for a while too, like the Zunes and you would like, or you could burn a CD too, which was fun.
Yeah, for sure.
It's funny because I was also like a 13, 14-year-old kid on a farm in South Carolina, like illegally downloading like Tupac and Biggie songs and Lil Wayne,
exactly.
Which is just the most. My parents could not relate to that at all. They didn't like that music, nor they were like, you can get it on the internet. Like,
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I think just like a quick side note, like my dad's only had one email address ever, and it's his work email address. He's been working at the same place for over 30 years, like 35 years, I think, almost a little bit less. But that's crazy to have one email address. And for him, it's weird that I have more than one. And I think that the vast majority of people who are internet native have more than one, just as a necessity. I've worked at 4 companies, way more than that. I don't know how many companies have given me email addresses. Even in college, we got one. In high school, I had one. So just everywhere I've ever been, I've gotten an email address. Most of them are defunct now. But yeah, even just having one email address is so weird to somebody like me. Not weird at all, but it's just not an opportunity you're granted very often to only have one. It's sort of like it's like being an OG in ETH or something like that.
Yeah. It's weird. I mean, unless you have like a perfect email address, like if I had my first name at gmail.com, I'd be like, oh, I'm keeping that. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I was making like Laxfergie at Gmail. It's like the most stupid stuff, man. I should have been more forward thinking about it.
Yeah, I should have been going after it, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you also don't get to know the other tech. Like Gmail came out after AOL, Outlook, Hotmail, all that sort of stuff. Sure. And Gmail is like probably a superior internet, or just like this is another rabbit hole. But if you only have one, you don't really. It's crazy that he's had it that long.
That's a good point. Yeah, I knew it, but I brought it up a couple of months ago around the holidays, and it just was so fascinating because he's like, "Why the hell do you need more than one?" And it's like, I don't need more than one, but I have to have more than one as a necessity. But nonetheless,
you should get him a new one for his birthday.
Be the most cost-effective gift of all time. I got him a hardware wallet like 2 Christmases ago or 2 holidays ago, and I think it's still in the box.
Yeah. Dude, if he's got one email address, he's not going to be able to figure out how to use it.
I'm not talking smack, Pops. I don't think he's listening. I don't think he's going to listen, but even still, if I got him some Bitcoin, he'd open it out, something like that. But,
yeah, put some sats in there.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So then interestingly, we're talking about the internet. We're talking about pre-iPhones, pre-iPods. So iPod came out. I bought an iPod Shuffle in like sophomore or junior year in high school. I only remember that because I used it the first day I bought it. We went to the mall, got one, came home stoked, put like the 15 songs that would fit on it. And then I ran. I'm not a runner, but sometimes I just got to run. And I ran as a kid to like the railroad tracks, like a 2-mile run or something like that, 1.5 miles, running back, and got hit by a car. Like smoked, but the iPod Shuffle was fine, and like I was okay. I broke the wrist. It was like a much longer story that no one would get. It's a weird story. People who know it will laugh because it's funny. But I had an iPod Shuffle then. That was the day I got it, and I was like a sophomore in high school. And then a few years later, the iPhone came out. So then they fused those 2 things together, effectively putting the computer in people's pockets. And that was around the time that I met you. And that actually, interestingly, when we were seniors in high school in 2009. Bitcoin actually started running. So that was, not the first blockchain, obviously, maybe not obviously, but blockchains have been around as a technology for a long time. But Bitcoin, with its fair launch and its proof of work and its innovations in many ways, open sourced, and internet money. So in the first sentence of the abstract of the white paper for Bitcoin, it says, yada, 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 it's peer-to-peer e-cash system. And so that's the first internet native money. And so it's some people who grew up in the internet exchanging data like songs for free, crowdsourcing those things peer to peer. Internet native money makes a lot of sense to us. That's the whole, this 10-minute spiel has been about internet native money. To me, makes perfect sense. Like it almost makes no sense not to have it. And I understand that there's banking, mobile banking, online banking, and that's not what I mean. If I wanted to send Eric, if I wanted to wire Eric 20 grand right now, I first and foremost the check would bounce, sorry. And then 2, I would have to wait 7 days depending on which institutions, whether or not I have your information. There are lots of different things. Whereas I could send you 20 grand in USDC, a stable coin right now, and there'd be finality in way less than 5 minutes, and probably be finality in less than way less, like in a matter of 90 seconds or something like that. So,
if not quicker than that.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, exactly. And so, all that is to say, so Bitcoin came out around that time. It was a direct result of the 2008 mortgage crisis, and sort of it was in response to that, and it was released anonymously by Satoshi Nakamoto. Interesting history in and of itself. There's a huge rabbit hole there that we won't get into. And then that following year is when that 20,000 Bitcoin transaction for 2 pizzas happened. So we were freshmen in college. Before we lived above the pizzeria in our sophomore year, people were buying pizzas for 20,000 Bitcoin, which is fascinating. It's a long time ago. We were kids. It's kind of wild.
It is wild, man. And it was like,
by the time,
nobody knew about Bitcoin back then, really. Like the only people I heard about, my younger brother had a friend who was trying to figure out how to mine Bitcoin, like 2011, 2012. And he told me about it. And I was like, oh, because it was my younger brother. I was like, I don't know anything about that. And like, it sounds stupid. Like I did not dig deep at all. And all it would have taken is like reading even just reading the white paper back then. It'd probably been like, oh, this seems like a legit idea, man.
Yeah, I think it was my understanding it's pretty niche. Like there were a lot of forums. Like it wasn't like there was prolific Facebook. I remember when I was a high school student, Facebook became popular. Maybe it was released then. And I was at a boarding school. And so at the boarding school, we wanted to be involved in Facebook, but we didn't have collegiate email addresses. And so we couldn't get involved yet because it was exclusive for people who were in college. College kids is what Facebook was originally. You had to have an EDU address. And so we weren't able to participate. We're being sad about that. I mean, I haven't had a Facebook in 10 years, but at that time it was a big deal to want one. So we're talking about like pre-Reddit, all these, like everywhere we get our news from, everywhere we sort of like hang out on the internet. And then sort of ironically, I guess, is there anything else to add here? Oh, by the time that we were seniors in 2013 in college, so right as we were graduating, Bitcoin breached $1 million market cap. So that's not really that interesting of a number or price. I mean, it's sort of like a barometer if you care about macro markets, but it's kind of a big deal.
It just means that like
people care.
Yeah. And it just means of all the Bitcoin that was in circulation, the value, if you were to attach a dollar value to each Bitcoin and you multiply that dollar value by the amount of Bitcoin there was, it reaches $1 million, right?
Exactly. Yeah, precisely. And ultimately, it's interesting because it's not issued by a central bank. That's the most interesting part, is that it's trustless. It's a bunch of people's computers running nodes and miners that ultimately trust one another because they're all running the same source of code, and then ultimately they can verify that trustlessly over the internet, made possible only by the internet. So it's really, really interesting that we were college seniors. You were like valedictorian. You were like, he was in the student body government, like the bank, wearing all these sashes and stuff and all these pins, and I was like a degenerate who barely walked. But yeah, I mean, that was the time where Bitcoin reached $1 million in market cap, and like the internet was absolutely fascinating time to sort of grow up into that. And at that time, then 2 weeks after graduating, I moved to rural Zambia with no electricity, no running water for 2.5 years, almost 2.5 years. And it like completely ripped the Band-Aid off in terms of internet connectivity. Like I had a dumb phone. I didn't have an iPhone. I had a camera, but it obviously didn't have any Wi-Fi on it. And then I would get internet like once a month or at least once a quarter. But like I didn't know what to do. I was just like, if you live your life on the internet every day and then you get it once a month, it's almost like loses it's like, what are you going to do for an hour? You send emails and you upload photos, really is what you do. Yeah. But I mean, that is when I really acutely realized my absolute love for and interest, fascination in the internet. Is having it not taken away from me. It's so dramatic and melodramatic and silly, but it really felt as though I had made a huge mistake. Ironically, I had to, a lot of the work that I'd done, I wrote a grant to the University of Georgia, and they then supplied me. And then they sent to an intermediary, shout out to Bongo Hive in Lusaka in Zambia with Charles Wanza. Shout out to Bongo Hive, still around, still teaching people how to write code in JavaScript. But Bongo Hive was the intermediary in Lusaka. They received this package from the University of Georgia, and then they drove it out to me in rural Zambia, like 8-hour drive into the middle of nowhere. And then we met at this school, and like a high school that I didn't actually work at, but it was down the road near a hospital. And what we did there is we installed a microgrid, so 2 car batteries, several solar panels, and then hooked that all up really simplistically, and then had 8 tablets, Nexus 7 tablets. I don't know what year they came out, but that was the tablet we had. And then we had 1 desktop computer that was the mainframe for everything. And then we had a router so that we could shoot Wi-Fi to all those tablets. And then I taught computer literacy, and we had an intranet there. Blanking on the name of it. Gosh, I feel like that's e-granary is what it's called. And the e-granary is just an intranet. So it's not like it's accessing the actual internet and the interweb. What it's doing is it has all of these documents stored on that local hard drive that then are accessible through anything that can connect over Wi-Fi to that hard drive. And it's powered through the sun, through those car batteries and the solar panels. And next door was a hospital. So we had medical dictionaries all on there, medical encyclopedias as well. And then we had the high school students, and then anybody in the area. It's all free. It's still around, still kicking. And so anybody can go through there and actually use the internet or use this intranet, get the idea of how to search, and then actually learn computer literacy. So that was a huge, ironically, living in the middle of nowhere, ended up about a year in. That was one of the most impactful projects. And it sort of like allowed for me to bridge the gap between that time and where we are now. So that's a lot for me that I want to hear more about.
I mean, that's a cool full circle thing too, from talking about growing up with the internet to providing it to people and, 8 hours away from the city that would actually have internet. And now, that's a cool legacy to leave on, where kids there might be growing up and learning things on, via technology that they wouldn't have.
For sure.
Yeah. It's a cool legacy to pass on.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
It was there. So when did you when you came back, what got you into kind of the Bitcoin? What stroked your interest in Bitcoin after that?
Yeah, for sure. Like coming back, the internet is one thing, but then the ability. So a lot of the work that we had done, I mentioned this last week, and it's sort of a lot of the, being a Peace Corps volunteer is interesting in that a lot of people, you're there to serve, to help in whatever way people want for you to help. And so if people, I was hired as an English teacher. It ended up that no one came to school. And so to go and teach in front of no one makes obviously zero sense. And so what instead I tried to do is assimilate, learn the local language, hang out, play soccer, meet little kids, meet any leaders in the community who wanted to spend time with me and talk about whether those are headmen who are locals or chiefs in the local area. And then also just like community leaders, oftentimes they're associated with different churches. There's very little infrastructure, very little going on, but there's a lot of demand for community banking initiatives. There's no banking infrastructure. There's no electricity. There's also no banks in case you can't abstract that. Oftentimes those groups that I would be working with, a lot of men, it's a very patronistic society. There's a lot of really interesting discussion to be had there, but ultimately a lot of the groups who had an interest in the community banking are women's groups, and women's groups are doing all sorts of things from sewing and creating or selling anything from fruit or a lot of the carpentry work is for the men, but a lot of the sewing of school uniforms or a lot of the selling of small fruits in little gardens and things like that, or small vegetables, sort of like there's this little savings, but there's no ability to actually sort of preserve that savings. And so it would literally be buying a physical lockbox, having 2 different keys that are redundancies, having a notebook, having a pen and paper, and making it such that there's a secretary. But you have to trust everybody. You've got to be really, really close to these people and trust them. And ultimately, none of those, as far as I know, have succeeded. And I'm regularly in touch with a counterpart of mine who lives there and grew up there. He's like third generation. He's been there his entire life for generations and generations and generations. I knew his parents, and he's like 30 years older than us. He's an older guy, and so as far as I know, these community bankings, they're very difficult to preserve because people, they default on their loans, so to speak. I go to buy a door, and when I buy the door, I then am supposed to make that money back somehow, but it's very difficult to make that money back. It's not as easy as it sounds. I mean, it sounds very simple. So then coming back, I just was interested in I was disillusioned. I was very, living in New York City. I was, trying to figure out what the heck is important, what's not important, what are people working on, why are people working on all this stupid stuff that I don't actually help people. I just was like so I don't know, like emo. I'm not sure the right way to say it. Yeah, but I really struggled. Works. Yeah, I struggled to find like meaning. And I just really am interested in the internet. So I spent a lot of time on Reddit and spent a lot of time in these places that we were talking about earlier that I just love and feel like I at home. And came across Bitcoin somewhere. I don't know where, but ultimately bought a book that I mentioned last week that I've since cracked back open blockchain revolution, and it just like changed the way that I think about the store of value and how it can be internet native. And that really turned me on to Bitcoin. That was 2016. And then, all sorts of aspirations around it, but it's always just been a hobby, like something I've been secretly interested in. It's not like I bought a bunch of it, coming from the Peace Corps, it's not like you are given a bunch of money or a volunteer. Yeah. And so, I didn't have enough money or capital to put it in there, but, I definitely, I was lucky enough to save money working in sales and different startup jobs over the years and put a little bit of here, put a little bit there. It's not like I really played around with anything other than Bitcoin, but Bitcoin was really something that, I want to hear about Ethereum and how it is that you came across. I don't remember the Genesis story, but I remember talking about Bitcoin with you and you telling me about Ethereum and me honestly thinking it was a joke, like not understanding the history of it at all. I've since, we've since, spent a lot of time on this stuff, years. But I mean, yeah, I want to hear about, Ethereum was like 8 years ago. So
yeah, I think it launched 2014, but I didn't get my hands on any. 2018, there was a huge bull run, kind of one of the like regular things that investors say is like, when you're a Lyft driver or your handyman's talking about an investment, it's time to sell. And I was one of those people who heard everything and I was like, oh, I'm going to buy it. So like, I bought less than $1,000 worth of Ethereum and made a little bit of money and then sold it when everything went down and stopped thinking about it. Like I didn't really have savings until 2020. I've been working jobs, but like had never been very fiscally responsible. And then saved up a decent amount thinking about buying a house in Austin leading into 2020. COVID happened. The housing market went absolute. Like I still don't fully get housing valuations and why they're so expensive and why you would lock yourself into a 30-year mortgage if you didn't have to. And so I decided not to and had all this money sitting in pretty much a savings account with really low interest. And I was like, I am losing money with inflation. Like I didn't have a lot of great budgeting skills, but I was like, I'm gonna start learning about and playing around with investments. I used an app called Acorn for like index investments, which just takes out I seeded it with some, and then it takes out every time you buy. But I was like, that's a long game. I wanted to learn more, and like through social media, I'd been hearing more and more about. Kind of fell into conversations about crypto and kind of followed that thread because it was interesting to me that people were talking. It was DeFi summer, as they called it. So people were earning, pretty solid interest on their investments. And so I went down that rabbit hole kind of, and I started investing in Ethereum pretty regularly between, $300 and $400, which worked out really well for the time being. But I was just buying on a centralized exchange. So like the way it's like going to E-Trade and purchasing a stock of Apple every 2 weeks, and that's the way that I was doing it. I wasn't really understanding the underlying tech. I was just making money on these investments. I was like, that's cool. And then I kind of started digging deeper and deeper. There's a bunch of communities on Discord and Telegram, which are, for people who don't know, it's almost like really small scale Facebook groups, you could say, but like beefed up.
They're like AOL Instant Messenger almost of modern day. They're very similar.
Which for us is a natural progression to be like, oh, people are in these chat rooms talking about the thing that I'm interested in, and you can start learning really fast.
Globally, all sorts of accents. You hear India, you hear people in the hills of India, you hear people on Hong Kong. You hear all these random accents. It's really cool.
It is. It's super cool. I've heard that there's a quote that's something about like the last technological revolution, like the internet, Apple, and everything happened in people's garages, and the next one's going to happen on Discord, which awesome. I believe, you can connect with people across when we work in the space, we work with people in literally every time zone across every continent almost, which is outside of Antarctica, which is pretty crazy thing to be doing. And, so I got involved in these communities and I learned that you could actually send money off of Coinbase where I was buying it onto a wallet that's literally on the blockchain, and you take like complete ownership. You can start investing in assets that are very volatile, but also can be good and bad. You can invest in NFTs, which was something I was super interested in. I just like art, and it started by artists. The reason that I got into it was artists can set a royalty on an NFT. So every time it's sold in perpetuity, they earn 5% royalties. So say somebody released a piece of art in 2020 that I bought, they earned a little fee off that. If I sell it 10 years from now for a lot the way some fine art goes, they'll still get that fee and they can keep getting that, which is something you wouldn't get in the regular art world. So for me,
yeah, it's astounding.
Yeah, for me that was super interesting, and I started getting into buying one of one art, which is cool.
That's what I was gonna say. It's usually limited supply. It's not like these are infinite supply tokens. Like NFTs inherently, not inherently, non-fungible tokens themselves are interesting and something that I think that when you and I were talking about Ethereum, like for me, from a Bitcoin perspective, it's sort of the one that it's the blockchain, the peer-to-peer e-cash system that has worked and that is continuing to work. It's continuing to prove itself out. It's been over 10 years now. And Ethereum was built on the back of that. And they reference it so many times in their white paper. Their white paper for Ethereum is, I don't know, 40 pages. The one for Bitcoin is 8 pages. It's very simple. The one for Ethereum is much more complicated to me. And I've read it a few times. It's a long read. It's interesting. But what they've done is they've made it such that you can write code on top of a blockchain and you can do peer-to-peer sort of data transfers, which is fascinating. But Ethereum itself is not sort of here to usurp Bitcoin. That's not the narrative, at least from the experts. It's not supposed to be thought of as ETH, which is the currency, is to replace Bitcoin. That's not the idea. The idea is to make the Bitcoin technology actually more useful. You can actually build things on top of it on a ledger, a distributed ledger, a blockchain in this instance. And you can then do things like you can spin up a token. We can create this scruffy Hellstrom token right now. It would take us 5 minutes. And you could then have an infinite supply of that. Like Dogecoin is another, that's an infinite supply. So it's not that the value of it is not in that it has a limited supply or scarce. The value in that is that people like it. They think it's got memetics. So it's best. Memes are just like silly things people like photos with captions that are funny. There's nothing wrong with that. Some things are very human. Music, dancing, laughter, and memes make people laugh. People love memes. They're very international. They're amazing. I think that's a very internet native thing. That meme coins are an extension of that, I would say. So I think that you can build a lot of things on Ethereum, but some things have more merit than others, sort of related back to our conversation last week. And NFTs don't always have value, but there are a lot of NFTs that people love. Whether or not I care about them has nothing to do with the fact that a lot of people, 2,000 people care a lot, and they don't care about me. And that's absolutely fine. And so when you were telling me about sort of NFTs and then the metadata of NFTs and the way that you can use that not only as like a picture that you see, but also transfer that metadata that's unique to the one that you minted elsewhere on, metaverses and these other instances of having that data replicated, or not replicate itself, but manifest itself in a VR or AR, or even just being able to look at it the way that a lot of people think of NFTs. There's a lot of data there in terms of the interoperability of that information and it being uniquely yours. Most importantly, it's attributed on a blockchain to your name, which I think is Erich.eth, right? And so we can literally look at your wallet and see all of your things that are on the Ethereum blockchain that have that metadata, that NFT data. It's really interesting. I'm not so sure that I'm using those words all correctly, but
yeah, close enough, dude. Yeah, it was cool for me too. To the art point, there's something called provenance in art, which is the list of people who've owned it, and the way provenance on a piece of art is important because you can be like, oh, this person's, especially old pieces. But on the blockchain, you can see the provenance of an NFT token. That's a one-of-one piece of art for every time it's been sold, how long somebody's held it, and where it is right now. So a lot of people are like, oh, you can just right-click a picture on the internet and save it, which you could, but you can't prove on chain that you own it, which is something that I was into. And, from there too, with NFTs, there's cool things you can do. I did like an NFT scavenger hunt in early 2021, which was before NFTs had a lot of clout. It was before. Dude. It was before Bored Apes.
You telling me about this and me being like, dude, what are you doing? Like, this is such a waste of your time.
I know. And it was so fun for me. I mean, I spent 3 weeks and like every day after work, I'm like doing the scavenger hunt with these people in Discord, which was super fun. And to me, just got me hooked. And I was like, I haven't been this excited about something in a while, which led to doing more things, being a part of more communities, finding more awesome opportunities, leading to working in the space and, learning. I've learned how to invest better now. A lot of people are very scared of scams because there's a lot of them. And if you're somebody who's willing, if you're just looking for a way to make money, you're probably going to lose money in the space. But you can, you can learn and, you have access to invest in things extremely early. And when people talk about value of projects, there's definitely projects that provide a service on the internet. Like if you pay for any service on the internet, you pay for Netflix streaming, that's a hosted service that's on the internet. hosted services like have inherent value. They drive revenue. They're big businesses. Facebook's a huge business, granted a lot of it, and the backs like Google, Facebook, most social platforms make. The impetus for me, just to wrap it up in a nice bow, was, I started learning how to save money. I looked into different avenues to do it that made sense with the way that, we, our age group, and with our experience, we grew up on the internet, on the computer. The digital version of cash and investment and new projects and ownership, or decentralized ownership as people call it, makes complete sense to me. And it's surprising to me that it doesn't make sense to everybody yet, which is cool, because we see projects every day and new use cases, and we work in the space with exciting people, and it's still a $1 trillion market cap asset class, all of crypto. It's been exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think that one of the things I try to drive home in the first video is that not all tokens equal dollars. Like, not all tokens have a value, because governance tokens, for example, are used for voting. They're not really it really is weird to me. I see so much stuff on Twitter about people talking about governance tokens, about how they should go up in price. And with supply and demand, sure, that makes sense. But I don't know if we should denominate it in dollar terms, because what you're actually holding there is the right to vote on something or to bring proposals to light. And you're not holding something that's inherently valuable. You read the white papers for those tokens, they don't talk about exchange rates to dollars. They don't talk about that. Those are, if they do, those are Ponzi schemes. That's not what a governance token is by definition. And so you got to really make sure that one of ones, all sorts of NFTs are really interesting. Artists are interesting. I spend a lot of time watching movies, these are all interesting sort of things you can put on a blockchain and make into NFTs. We talked a lot about having stories, like literal literature on the blockchain, and that's something you thought a lot about. But I just want to I just wanted to make sure that it's really clear that some things are valueless inherently they shouldn't be denominated in dollars.
Yeah, and I think
but that's what happens.
Yeah, there's not. The country we live in is very scared of regulating or coming out with clear and succinct things on how a token should be handled, because we're, to be honest, way behind where we should be. Literally, I read the Treasury Department of India is already releasing a CBDC, which is a government-backed stable coin, which is just, you take, in the US, that would be a $1 bill equals 1 USDC token on chain. And there's already governments who are running pilot programs, and they are holding in reserves actual dollars that relate to this token on chain. And there's ways to do that. When people make a governance token and they pair it on a decentralized exchange with another token, people start to add value to that, which most projects will tell you, we're not building this as a security or as something that is a piece of stock in our company. This is something to be used on voting for a project that operates on the blockchain. And I think people will start to learn that, and I'm sure regulation will meet it at some point in one way or the other.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, and I think that there's a brash way to do it. They're just arresting people who are developers. That's really silly. It doesn't really solve the problem. This is open source technology, and it shows that people in government didn't grow up with the internet, because if you understood what open source technology is, you realize that you're not nipping it in the bud. The only way to solve if you wanted to arrest the people, what you really should try to do is shut down the internet. And that's just oppressive. And so I don't think that's realistic. If it is, it'd be a huge problem for you and I. We'll be able to do this podcast anymore, most importantly. But more interestingly, I think that, when I was a year ago, when I decided to take a leap of faith and join the space, it's not because I hold a big bag of Bitcoin, or because I think that all of these things are super valuable and I want to get my hands on as many as possible. I think it's much more about, working in startups for 6-7 years before then. You see a lot of companies, you meet a lot of companies, you see fundraising. A big part of my job is just to understand who's raising money, because therefore they can spend money on your products, and reaching out to them, building relationships. And then those people go to new companies and they are friends of yours, and you go hang out with them, and then the new company, whatever it might be. If you have a useful enough product, that's sort of very, very rudimentary way of explaining it. But, that's kind of what sales is in software. And so, but the vast majority of these companies fail. And that's really sort of a surprise in the beginning. But then after years, you realize that's very standard. And you read that 70% of startups fail, all these different things. And that's why venture capitalists, they don't invest in one company. They invest in 500 companies. And then 5 of them succeed, or hopefully a higher hit rate than that. But in this space, if I was sort of, I was sort of disillusioned with work, it's fun to work at a big company. It's fun to scale companies. Once it gets to be a bigger size, it's much less interesting, at least from my perspective. A little bit less, have a little bit less agency, a little bit more levels between you and the senior leadership in some instances, which is a little bit less interesting. All that aside, I do think that given the opportunity to join a brand new industry, sort of like built on the back of Bitcoin, which is something I've been, I think there's a lot of inherent value in there, just vis-a-vis the internet. But then seeing these startups, it's not because I think that all of these companies are going to succeed. As a matter of fact, I think that most of them will fail. And that's absolutely fine. I think that they're trying new things and teaching the world who's watching a lot of valuable insights. And I think that my thesis when I'd done this, and the only person that you share a thesis with the best buddies and and your family who are concerned with you when you say you're quitting your job. And my thesis is really that that there is an asymmetric upside here. If I become an expert in the space and I watch all these people fail and I'm able to interact with them and be friends with them, and failure is relative. Failure is not used in the way that a lot of people used it. Maybe I think of failure as being positive, and that's not my idea. That's obviously a huge part of sort of venture capitalism and entrepreneurship and starting companies. And so it's sort of been indoctrinated in me and in sort of startups in general. Failure is a part of success in the long term. But if you watch all of these companies try and you're learning from them and meeting them and understanding what it is that they're doing, in 3 or 4 years, the ones who have abstracted all the DLT, who have abstracted all of the blockchain technology under the hood, no one's asking Elon Musk, oh, where's the axle? Why does this, where's the, no one cares. Does it give me different A to B? Oh, it's awesome. Wow, it's fast. Oh, cool. It doesn't really matter what's under the hood as much as how, whether or not it actually gets you from A to B and it's solving a real problem that you have. And I think some people will. And at that point, we don't have to be the ones who do it, but we're watching, and we're very intently watching, 10 plus hours a day, many days, just because we find it interesting. And if you find something so intellectually stimulating, it's not ever work. That's kind of the coolest part, is that I don't really feel like I'm working, but I'm soaking in so much interesting information, surrounded by people who are building really interesting stuff and learning and forming my own opinions. And so a year in now, it's been over a year since I quit my most recent gig at a SaaS company, and it's been amazing to do it full time. And ultimately, I finally feel as though I've got the courage. When you called me a couple of weeks ago to say, let's talk about this, because not many people are talking about the pragmatic side of it. They're talking a lot about this token is undervalued. You got to buy it. Do it now. And then they're also talking about, I just started this project. It's undervalued. Buy it now. It's
everybody wants you to buy something. I think that is I think we both very much believe that if you're watching a piece of content or listening to a piece of content on a podcast or YouTube or reading it on social media, and it's telling you, somebody's giving you advice on the value of an asset, they're a trader. They're not an actual builder in the space who particularly cares. They're just trying to make money. And, that's not why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the last thing I'll say, I know that we're right at 40, we should cut it. But the last thing I'll say is that the biggest thing that we're understanding, I think that I'm understanding, we talk a lot about, is that tech doesn't win. Hype wins. What people are interested in wins. Dogecoin is important, not because it's actually great technology. The guys who made it literally think it's a joke. But ultimately, people care about it. Elon Musk tweets about it. Our buddy buys it, even though he's not in this space. He thinks it's cool. It's a mutual friend of ours. And so I think that ultimately, by having feet on the ground and being on the front lines, you understand, you start to understand that, you're not going to, it doesn't really, the technology is fascinating, and the more you know about it, the better that you are to, ultimately make decisions. But I do think that there's a lot to be said for being here to watch, not necessarily to attribute value or to even have opinions, but ultimately to see, where's the hype going? Why do these people care about this? There was a coin on Solana, literally valueless. I don't want to. It's a meme coin. Meme coins inherently are mimetic. It's a joke, but it's pumping, and people are so stoked on it, and it's interesting. It's like, why is this happening? Solana's, there's a whole history to Solana. It's sort of like an alternative to Ethereum, and it's its own network, and it's interesting in and of itself. But is there a lot of inherent? Is it competing with Bitcoin? Absolutely not. I don't think that they would say that. If they did, it'd be somebody who has a large amount of them who wants for you to buy them from them, and they're being dishonest with you. So it's So that's the last thing I'll say.
Okay, I got a closer for us.
All right, good.
I will say to that, or I've been listening to like a bunch of podcasts. Basically, a lot of people who built things like Airbnb, like Uber, Lyft, like were investors in those in the early days. And one of the recurring themes is when they started those companies, everybody thought they sounded stupid, and they had to do things for years where people didn't get it, and people wrote stories about how dumb it was. And then once it got big, they were like, "Oh, this is genius. The gig economy is changing." But when you tell people that you're staying in other people's homes, in their rooms while they're there, or you're riding in a stranger's car, like somebody who lives it, like when that first came out, people were like, that is weird. People thought Venmo was weird when it came out. And some of these things just take time when they're good ideas. And we think we both have a lot of conviction in the fact that, decentralized tech and things that are immutable, like blockchain DLT tech is dope. And then the last thing is I've been listening to a lot of Sam Altman. I've been listening to Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, which is huge now. But there's something called,
everybody I've spoken to the last couple of weeks. It's all I talk about. So he's the guy who runs that company.
Yeah, Sam Altman's great follow, great to listen, and he's like kind of prolific, but
he's also
he said one thing that
dude's a robot for sure.
Yeah. Oh, he's such a robot. But he says a lot of investors or people are always worried about like the TAM, the total addressable market of a project they're investing in right now. And he's like, you should be thinking about the total addressable market in 10 years from now, which I think personally for the tech we're in is going to be exponentially larger, like possibly on the same level of people who are using Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, Absolutely. All that stuff.
Interestingly, it might not be the same market because, relating back to Zambia, a lot of the kids I was working with, classes weren't that well attended. So then I also, played soccer, and then those kids would want to, do little tutor sessions and stuff like that. So we'd hang out in my yard, and like I had a chalkboard. And so we would hang out. And a lot of those kids had cell phones, but no power, but they had cell phones as a status symbol. And those kids now like moved to Lusaka or to Chapada, these local cities, like the capital or these local cities, to make some cash. And they're powering their phones, and they're mobile first. These are mobile first kids. We grew up with block computers on a desktop in the 90s. These kids are growing up now with cell phones in their hands. And those cell phones might not be smart, but they're very familiar with the idea of buying talk time, which is ultimately like the ability for me to re-up on my data every month. And what they're doing is they're mobile native, and that mobile experience is internet native as well. And so there's going to be I talk to people, I play golf, and there are a lot of people who play golf who look like me. And a lot of those dudes who play golf and look like me work in banking in the New York State area. And those guys, they're skeptical, and they should be, but they're not the dudes who are going to use. They're not the ones who need for there to be a banking infrastructure for them to use. Because like I had said last episode, I can go get a bank account. It's very easy for me to get a bank account. But there are a lot of people around the world who don't. And I don't mean a lot like 5%. I mean a lot like 50% who don't have access to a bank. You're muted. And so I just, that's interesting to think about in and of itself. Mobile first, 10 years from now, like,
I don't think people are still sleeping on the cell phone too, or banking from your cell phone.
Yeah, dude. It's crazy. Like no one talks about this. Solana, interestingly, coming back to Solana, I'm not a Solana bull, but I don't hold any Solana at all. I don't hold any of these coins, but I hold Bitcoin, but I just to be really clear, and none of this is financial advice. Obviously, we're talking so much smack, but
I can't wait in a year to do like a cut every time you say something. You're like, no, this is financial advice.
Because it's so dumb. Anybody listens to us, yeah. But yeah, Solana came up with the phone. Absolutely fascinating. A lot of the dudes at Solana are in Eastern Europe, and like there's some use case there. It's interesting, but a lot of those people are internet native, and so they have the option to use. I'm looking at an iPad, I'm looking at a computer here. I've got a computer over there, and so. For us, it's very simple for us to use these things. But ultimately, when it comes to the mobile game, like a lot of apps aren't native to mobile, and so they're mobile responsive, but they're native to a browser on a desktop computer. And so it's people just aren't building for that. Although there are, and I don't mean to say that there are none. It's not true. I know a lot of people in Nigeria and Kenya and Uganda, and there's some incredible tech hubs across the African continent, even San Salvador. And then in addition to that. Panama City is a big hub. There are a lot of really interesting people all over the world who I've met and some who I haven't met, but I've chatted with who are building really interesting stuff. And it's just getting started. Most of them will fail, but a lot of them will succeed. And the ones that will succeed will be the first to do it. Those are emerging markets. Like those markets, especially with fraction, like you can break. Yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
That stuff's interesting and fascinating.
Well, yeah, let's do a whole fucking mobile opportunity episode, dude.
Dude, I mean, I wish there was more. I wish there was more stuff to talk about. Just there's not that much. There's a lot, but there's not that much. And so, we're still really, really, really early in that, I think. But yeah, no, I'm with you. All right, cool. Yeah. I think we got to cut. It's way too much time.
Yeah, we got to cut it
a lot.
Yeah, dude, fun one. Great thanks to anybody who's listening. Shout out to Josiah Soren, who we're also going to use he's the music at the beginning. Check out Josiah Lo-Fi Leopards.
NFTs with music. Those things that we minted come with little unique tracks of lo-fi, like hip hop beats. That's sort of up our alley personally. So I remember we minted a few of them ourselves, and then we reached out to him. He shared a lot of the music with us, and so we're using that, and it's cool, really cool. So but thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Any feedback is more than welcome. Leave a comment, talk some smack.
Always, dude.
Awesome, man. Sweet.